Hi everybody, this is Anne. One of our recent videos focused on a decorating technique called makumigani, where I demonstrated manipulating stacked, colored clay slabs to create projects. This process left me with a lot of clay scraps. One of the most asked questions I received was, what do you do with all those scraps? In this video, I thought I'd show you one idea on how to recycle your leftover clay to make decorative slabs. This technique is called laminating. After I demonstrated the makumigani projects, I promptly stored and sealed up all the wet clay scraps in a plastic bag to keep them moist. Even though my bag is pretty full, you don't really need a lot of scraps to complete these projects. First, I'll show you how to create a laminated flowered slab. The process of lamination starts with rolling out a plain white slab a 1/4 inch thick. I ribbed it smooth with a soft rubber rib. I knew I wanted to make a mug out of this slab, so I lightly traced around my template roughly where I wanted the design to be, and I put that aside. Next, I needed to roll my colored clay scraps down to 1/8 of an inch. I have these two 1/8 inch deep wooden strips to gauge it by. I placed a sheet of plastic wrap on the work surface, then placed one of my scraps on the plastic, topped with another piece of plastic. With the sticks on either side, I rolled the clay very thinly. The plastic keeps the fragile sheets from sticking and ripping. I turned the scraps over and rolled them on the back side too. You can see how thin these are. Just before we taped this video, I found this small heart-shaped cookie cutter in the grocery store, perfect for this project. While the clay was still sandwiched between the plastic, I cut out hearts from the scraps. To make the flowers, I cut the hearts into thirds around that top heart dimple. I separated the pieces and flared out the two end pieces like they were the leaves around the flower. I brought back the white slab and positioned each flower so that they were evenly spaced and staggered on top of the slab. Some of the flowers ran over the template edges, and that's totally fine. I placed a piece of plastic back over the flowers, making sure it stuck down over the scraps and tightly to the white slab. I then began to roll from the top of the template down to the bottom. The stuck plastic locks those pieces into place so they don't spread out much when rolled. Instead, the scraps are forced down and laminated into the white slab. When you roll on one side of the slab, it's a good idea to turn it over and roll the other side too, to minimize the chances of future warping. And yes, the slab does stretch out a bit from the rolling, but the integrity of the flower shapes is still intact. I just replaced the template over the new slab and cut around that part that I wanted. For this design, it just looked like it needed little dots over each flower, so I slip-trailed black underglaze over each one. Remember that the white slab and the scraps may have different moisture levels, so to balance it out, I placed the slab between two damp paper towels covered with plastic for about 1 or 2 hours. Now I can use the slab to create my mug. Remember that when you curl the slab, the edges of the clay scraps may not bend, resulting in a separation. I burnished each of the flower pieces, making sure they curled around and all the edges were tight to the white slab. Now here's a variation on that idea where I cut those shapes free-handed and dotted the bottom of each design. To keep the rim from warping, I extruded a clay coil and attached it to the rim. Now here it is, all glazed and fired. I glazed the top and bottom border with Spectrum black glaze and clear glaze on the body. I was happy with that. All the flower pieces stuck tight to the mug and the rim stayed round. Next, let's use the colored layers from the scraps to try and mimic layers of rose petals. Again, I rolled out and ribbed a 1/4-inch white slab. I found a long sliver of scrap that had lots of thin layers showing on the edge. I cut off a layer right along that edge. I sandwiched the piece between thin plastic with the layers upright. I used my rolling pin to flatten it down and stretch it out very thinly. Using an X-Acto knife, I cut a small triangle. You don't have to be exacting with your cuts. All roses will look different. I placed the triangle in the center of the white slab. Cutting that first triangle created an angle along the edge of the scrap. I cut that sliver and arranged it loosely around the triangle on the white slab. I cut another angled sliver along the grain to capture the layers, then placed it so that it angled around the piece that I had previously laid on the slab. I continued this pattern of cutting and arranging so the strips wrapped around the center and themselves. Notice that for each consecutive layer, I cut larger angles. I finished by filling in some of the gaps with smaller angled pieces until I was satisfied. I really like that. To laminate, like the first project, I laid a piece of plastic over the rows, really sticking the plastic down around each sliver to lock them in place. Then, I used my rolling pin to press each piece down into the white slab until it was flat. Now here's a piece I made earlier where I let it sit under damp paper towels and plastic for several hours. I then molded the slab on a tray and gave it a coiled edge. I also scrunched up damp paper towels and placed them right on the coiled edges to keep them from drying out and splitting. I want this platter to dry really slowly, which also means that it wasn't dry enough to fire yet for this video. Again, I dipped into my bag and found several unaltered stacked pieces. I'll use this V cutting tool to dig into the layers. I started cutting long strips deep into the layers to create striated strips. I just kept carving into the slab all through the layers to get all these scraggly strips. I began to arrange them into bundles in patterns across the surface of the white slab. This is a free-flowing form, so it was fun to just let the grassy strips look like they were blowing in the wind. When I was happy with the arrangement, again I placed plastic over the strips to lock them in place. I then rolled the pieces flat to the surface like the other projects. Now that the new fabric is created, you can cut it out as you like for your project. Here's a plate that I made earlier, again using the damp paper towel drying method along the coiled edge and letting it dry slowly. Here's another variation I created, laying thicker strips together in more of a fan shape across the plate, highlighting those long rings of the colored clays. I also brushed on a little black underglaze on the edges of the strips to detail them and give them definition. So, I showed you 3 types of possible patterns, and I'm sure you're already thinking of many more patterns to laminate your slabs. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks button or the link to buy me a coffee. It also really helps us out if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time in the studio.